Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness some scenes from the next attraction to play this theater. This picture, truly one of the most unusual ever filmed.
"22 Controversies, 7 Levels." This is the ultimate disturbing movie controversy iceberg.
Why have you disturbed us?
We're going to start with some of the most famous movie controversies, but the deeper we get, the more niche and shocking the scandals will get. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Disclaimer. Level 1. The Interview, 2014. When they came up with The Interview, Seth Rogen and James Franco thought they were making a dumb comedy about two journalists recruited by the CIA to kill North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Of course, the film depicted the leader's head exploding in graphic detail during an assassination scene that Sony executives spent months debating and toning down. When North Korea saw the trailer, they immediately branded it as an act of war, with officials promising merciless retaliation if the movie was released.
North Korea says the United States is on the verge of committing an act of war and that its reckless, provocative insanity will be met with merciless retaliation from Pyongyang.
The regime's fury went way beyond typical diplomatic protests. A North Korean representative sent a letter to the UN once again calling the film an act of war, demanding the US ban its production and distribution. State television announced that allowing such a movie constituted sponsoring terrorism, and Kim Yong-chol, an official spokesman for Pyongyang, warned President Obama to be careful in case the US military wants to kill him as well. Then came November 24th, 2014. Sony employees arrived at work to find their computer screens displaying a creepy message from hackers calling themselves Guardians of Peace. The group had infiltrated Sony's networks for months, quietly copying terabytes of data before launching their attack using destructive malware that wiped Sony's infrastructure clean. They released everything online: employee emails, personal information, executive salaries, unreleased films, and screenplays. The hackers demanded Sony withdraw The Interview, but when it seemed like that wasn't going to happen, they threatened style attacks on theaters showing the film, warning moviegoers to keep yourself distant from the places where the film would be shown. Major theater chains panicked, understandably. Regal, AMC, Cinemark, and Carmike all canceled screenings, effectively controlling nearly half of America's movie screens. Sony had no choice but to cancel the Christmas Day release entirely, given that they had no screens to show the movie. The FBI formally accused North Korea of orchestrating the attack, citing similarities in malware code and network infrastructure to previous North Korean cyber operations. President Obama called Sony's capitulation a mistake, warning that giving in to such threats set a dangerous precedent for American free expression.
I would have told them, do not get into a pattern in which you're intimidated by these kinds of criminal attacks.
Eventually, the movie was released through a unique online digital rental service, which ended up making it Sony's most successful digital release ever. So, thanks, North Korea. Borat, 2006. Sacha Baron Cohen's classic 2006 mockumentary Borat: Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan transformed unsuspecting Americans into unwitting participants in a global comedy phenomenon. But they didn't think it was so funny. When the movie was released, two University of South Carolina fraternity members discovered their drunken, bigoted remarks had been broadcast to international audiences after they were told they were participating in a documentary that would never be shown in the United States. The production crew had taken them to a bar to loosen up before filming, and after heavy drinking, they signed release forms they were told had something to do with reliability issues with being in the RV.
Let me ask you this. Are women your slaves in Russia? No. Do you have slaves here?
No slaves. No slaves.
It is a shame.
And Bodak.
Big shame.
They were just two people who experienced this. In the remote Romanian village of Glad, residents were told they were participating in a documentary about extreme poverty in Romania that would fairly depict their lives. Instead, they found themselves portrayed as thieves, racists, and simpletons in a film that grossed over $200 million worldwide. Nicolae Todorache and Spiridon Surabia filed a $30 million lawsuit claiming they were exploited precisely because they didn't speak or read English. Etiquette teacher Kathy Martin faced what might be the most humiliating scenario when Cohen's character presented dinner party guests with a bag of human waste during what she believed was a cultural exchange with a foreign dignitary. She sued multiple production companies claiming fraud and emotional distress. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan's government launched a furious counteroffensive banning the film and running 4-page advertisements in the New York Times to combat Cohen's portrayal of their nation as backward and anti-Semitic. Embassy spokesman Roman Vasilenko spent considerable effort correcting facts like Kazakhstan's traditional drink being portrayed as fermented horse urine rather than fermented horse milk, which is better. There were hundreds of people in the movie who felt they were unfairly portrayed, but production companies had participants sign agreements specifying New York courts for dispute, effectively preventing most from pursuing legal action. By 2008, a New York judge dismissed several lawsuits, noting that participants had accepted money and signed releases for a documentary-style movie.
I was blamed for Kazakhstan's failure and banned from ever make reportings again. I was publicly humiliated.
The real Kazakhstan eventually embraced the controversy, adopting "very nice" as its tourism slogan in 2020.
Very nice.
So at least someone was happy in the end. The Sentinel, 1977. Michael Winner's 1977 horror film The Sentinel earned its place as one of cinema's most ethically problematic productions through a series of decisions that shocked even the exploitation-tolerant 1970s. The controversy mainly centered on Winner's casting choices for the film's hellish finale, where the director deliberately recruited people with physical disabilities from hospitals and sideshows to portray demons emerging from the underworld. They weren't given much makeup, artistry, or prosthetics, suggesting that these real individuals with amputations, deformities, and other conditions were displayed explicitly to frighten audiences as inhuman creatures. Winner defended his casting by claiming budget constraints made extensive makeup impossible, arguing he needed genuine deformed people to populate hell. He later insisted the performers enjoyed the experience, but cast member Chris Sarandon revealed the director's true nature on set, describing how Winner would openly mock these actors in front of the crew, making jokes about their appearances while cameras rolled. Even the New York crew refused to eat with the disabled performers, forcing production to erect screens to hide them during meal breaks. The film's treatment of women was just as disturbing. The story follows fashion model Allison Parker, whose history includes multiple attempts at self-destruction, triggered by childhood trauma involving her abusive father. The movie layers misogynistic themes throughout, presenting lesbian characters Gerd and Sandra as figures designed to inspire revulsion in the audience. Beverly D'Angelo's character engages in explicit behavior during what should be casual social interactions, purely to make audiences uncomfortable with non-heterosexual relationships, which were far less common in 1970s media. Reviews of the time were not at all positive, with many pointing out the weirdly anti-woman message at the heart of the story. The Catholic moralism underlying the narrative suggests that women's independence and non-traditional relationships represent pathways to damnation or hell. Allison's journey from autonomous model to religious sentinel requires her complete submission to male church authority, reinforcing regressive gender roles through supernatural terror.
Oh, God, help me.
The movie basically says, women are bad unless they're serving men. Actress Nana Visitor later revealed that Winner invited her to dinner after filming Wrapped and proceeded to assault her in his hotel room, pretty much confirming that these underlying messages are most likely things the director truly believed, whether he acknowledged it or not. Level 2. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. Martin Scorsese's adaptation of Nikos Kazantzakis' controversial novel The Last Temptation of Christ ignited one of cinema's most vicious religious battles when it reached theaters in 1988. The film portrayed Jesus as a tormented carpenter plagued by doubt and carnal desires, a depiction that sent shockwaves through conservative Christian communities worldwide. But what enraged believers most was a dream sequence where Jesus abandons the cross to marry Mary Magdalene and live as an ordinary man.
Don't look back there. God gave you life. Look ahead. A wedding ceremony.
Who's getting married?
You are.
Before most Christians had even seen the film, protests erupted across America. Bill Bright, founder of Campus Crusade for Christ, offered to purchase every print of the movie simply to destroy them. Mother Angelica warned that anyone who watched this sacrilegious film would be committing deliberate blasphemy and face eternal damnation. The fury reached its ultimate peak when 25,000 demonstrators gathered at Universal Studios carrying wooden crosses and Bibles while traffic backed up for miles. That was just the beginning. Theater chains in Georgia, Louisiana, California, and Oklahoma banned the film outright, while Blockbuster refused to stock it and major retail chains buckled under pressure from boycott threats. The Catholic Church officially labeled it morally offensive, while some Jewish leaders denounced it as anti-Semitic. The whole world seemed to be against this movie.
You're sure it's God? You're sure it's not the devil? If it's the devil can be cast out.
But what if it's God? You can't cast out God, can you?
But in France, the opposition turned genuinely dangerous as followers of excommunicated Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre launched a campaign of violence. Protesters threw tear gas canisters into crowded theaters while audiences watched the film, and that was not the end of the chaos. On October 22, 1988, arsonists used a sophisticated incendiary device to set fire to the Saint-Michel cinema in Paris during a screening, injuring 13 people with 4 suffering severe burns. 3 weeks earlier, another theater in Besançon was destroyed by an explosion and fire. French authorities arrested 8 people connected to the Paris attack, including members of the Christian fundamentalist group Christian Itineraries. The violence was so severe that Scorsese required FBI protection and received death threats, forcing him to cancel public appearances to promote the movie.
The reason why there's this reaction against the story is because to anyone who really believes fully would have a problem with this interpretation, with this approach.
Cardinal Jean-Marie Lustiger, who had condemned the film, was compelled to plead with attackers to stop their violence, declaring they were harming Christ himself despite her opposition to the movie. The film is still banned in Singapore and the Philippines. The Deer Hunter, 1978. Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter ignited a firestorm the moment it hit theaters in 1978, with critics and historians immediately attacking its most iconic sequence as pure lies. The Russian roulette scenes that defined the film had absolutely no basis in documented history, yet audiences apparently believed they were witnessing authentic wartime brutality.
Go ahead!
How about you?
Military historian Bill Allison later gave the film a devastating 3 out of 10 for accuracy, stating bluntly that the forced game scenario was not in the realm of possibility. I mean, it is a movie, but anyway, the controversy deepened when veterans realized how Vietnamese people were portrayed throughout the film. Every Vietnamese character appeared as a sadistic monster, laughing hysterically while inflicting cruelty on American prisoners. This was an insane level of cartoonish villainy that reduced an entire people to inhuman caricatures. Critics immediately recognized this as dangerous propaganda that ignored the complex realities of the actual conflict. Jane Fonda, who had infamously visited North Vietnam during the war, called The Deer Hunter a racist Pentagon version of the war without even seeing it. Gloria Emerson, a veteran war correspondent, delivered an even harsher verdict, labeling the film the creation of a shrewd monster, and called Cimino a man of tremendous energy, ambition, and staggering ignorance. She urged people not to enrich him further by attending screenings. The backlash reached international proportions at the 1979 Berlin International Film Festival, where the Soviet delegation and representatives from across Eastern Europe walked out in protest. They accused the film of insulting the Vietnamese people and violating festival statutes by failing to improve mutual understanding between peoples of the world. Cuba, East Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, and Czechoslovakia followed suit, creating a diplomatic crisis. Even the Oscar ceremony couldn't escape the fury. 13 members of Vietnam Veterans Against the War protested outside the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, carrying signs reading "No Oscars for Racism" and "The Deer Hunter, a Bloody Lie." Police arrested the demonstrators, but their message resonated with many who saw the film as a dangerous distortion of history. Poison, 1991. Did Todd Haynes expect his $250,000 experimental film to become a lightning rod for America's many, many cultural wars? Probably not. His 1991 indie darling Poison had quietly secured a $25,000 completion grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. Then, Reverend Donald Wildman discovered it existed.
People pick on meek souls. It's something in human nature, something very sad about human nature. We have to pick on those that are weaker than us.
Like most American outrage specialists, Wildman, the Mississippi-based head of the American Family Association, hadn't actually watched the film when he launched his crusade against it. He relied on secondhand descriptions and his own inflammatory imagination, writing to Congress that Poison contained explicit scenes of homosexuality involved in intimate acts. The reality was way, way different from Wildman's lurid characterizations, but facts rarely mattered in the fevered atmosphere of 1991. Gay stories were not commonly accepted mainstream material.
It was only a matter of time before Bolton would be accepted by the big shots. I could tell Rass, the group's kingpin, had an eye for him from day one.
The film itself consisted of 3 interwoven stories inspired by French writer Jean Genet's work. Hero followed a documentary-style investigation of a boy who shoots his father and mysteriously vanishes. Horror tracked a scientist whose experiment transforms him into a contagious outcast. And Homo explored the obsessive relationship between 2 prison inmates. The prison segment contained the homoerotic content that ignited Wildman's fury, though nothing even approached the graphic material he described. What truly enraged conservatives wasn't just the film's gay themes, but the government funding behind it. Republican politicians like Jesse Helms, Dick Armey, and Newt Gingrich seized on Poison as ammunition in their ongoing war against the NEA, having already targeted artists like Robert Mapplethorpe and Andreas Serrano for similar issues. NEA chairman John Frohnmayer had to defend himself and the movie, calling a press conference to defend Poison as neither prurient nor obscene, but the work of a serious artist dealing with serious issues. But behind the scenes, the White House warned him that his job was at risk if he couldn't avoid further controversies. Good luck with that one.
This term that came out of some of the reviews quoting tabloid television movies, it was not anything that I was trying to do at all.
Wildman's organization had built its reputation boycotting television shows and demanding corporate sponsorship withdrawals, and Poison offered a perfect target: taxpayer-funded art exploring themes that terrified insecure religious conservatives. Pulgasari, 1985. Kim Jong-il wanted North Korea to make better movies, but rather than investing in the industry or training skilled filmmakers, he decided to kidnap the people who could make them for him. Choi Yun-hee, South Korea's most famous actress, disappeared in Hong Kong in January 1978 after being lured onto a boat by men posing as business associates. She woke up 8 days later in Nampo Harbor, North Korea, face-to-face with the future dictator who had orchestrated her abduction. Kim Jong-il, a cinema obsessive with over 15,000 films in his personal collection, had been planning this for months. 6 months later, Shin Sang-ok, Choi's ex-husband and one of South Korea's most celebrated directors, traveled to Hong Kong searching for her. He walked straight into the same trap, pulled into a van with a sack over his head. Kim Jong-il later confessed he had kidnapped Choi first specifically as bait to lure Shin, whom he considered the real genius, to North Korea. The plan worked perfectly.
This was all part of Kim Jong-il's extended plan to kidnap Shin Sang-ok, as he hoped that despite them being divorced for several years, he would still go looking for her when she disappeared.
Shin attempted to escape twice, each time dragging him deeper into the nightmare. After a second failed attempt, guards sent him to a prison camp where he spent years in solitary confinement, forced to sit motionless for 16 hours daily, head bowed, under threat of execution for the slightest movement. Meanwhile, Choi lived in luxury villas but remained a prisoner, attending Kim Jong-il's parties where he paraded her around like a trophy.
After re-education that included daily lessons about the wisdom and blessings of Kim Il-sung, Choi Yun-hee was forced to essentially hang out with Kim Jong-il. He took her to operas, films, and social events such as parties.
In March 1983, Kim Jong-il orchestrated their reunion in a banquet hall, watching with amusement as the broken director embraced his ex-wife after 5 years of separation. They remarried at Kim's insistence and began producing films under his direct supervision or intimidation. Between 1984 and 1985, Shin directed 7 movies, including Pulgasari, North Korea's answer to Godzilla. The production itself was surreal, as Kim Jong-il flew in 15 Japanese special effects experts under false pretenses, including the actor who wore the original Godzilla suit. The film cost between $2 and $3 million, making it one of North Korea's most expensive productions, and absolutely nobody had a good time making it. In March 1986, while promoting Pulgasari at a film festival in Vienna, Shin and Choi finally escaped to the American embassy. Kim Jong-il immediately banned all their films from North Korean theaters and struck their names from official records, despite being the one who had brought them there. Their 8 years of captivity had produced movies that would never again see North Korean screens, or any screens. At least we have the next best thing, icebergs. If you want more great videos like this one, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Level 3. Bad Taste, 1987. In 1987, Bad Taste delivered a level of gore rarely seen at the time, showcasing explosive dismemberment, brains sprayed across pastoral hillsides, actors drenched in homemade crimson slop. You get the idea. Viewers recoiled at scenes like a sheep exploding into viscera, a chainsaw sliced through alien entrails, while one scene forced a character to spoon gobbets of regurgitated slime into his mouth, an image so revolting it lingered in nightmares for many. Critics described the visuals as relentless, almost gleeful in their brutality. Peter Jackson's debut had no room for subtlety, each sweetness vying to outdo the last in nauseating spectacle. Screenings in Australia required cuts to remove roughly 60 seconds of the most graphic material after the National Classification Board deemed it too excessive for public consumption. In Queensland, the film was banned outright 3 weeks into its run, a decision that led to the dissolution of the State's Review Board in 1990. Distributors proudly plastered "Banned in Queensland" on home video packaging as a badge of honor, and overnight, the movie became hugely popular. Overseas reactions varied, though. Germany split its release into 2 censored versions, a heavier cut for viewers under 18+, and even more trimmed edition, both sacrificing gruesome highlights such as a foot being nailed to a plank, a head bursting beneath gunfire, 2 moments that had become cult touchstones. These edits only amplified Bad Taste's reputation as schlocky gore-run riot. Nobody really cared about the plot, they just focused on the carnage within. Despite the backlash, Jackson's team embraced the controversy, often referring to the uproar as the best publicity we ever had. Fans lined up at midnight showings, eager to witness the repulsive set pieces that major studios had bypassed. The film's low-budget aesthetic, featuring crude prosthetics and buckets of dyed corn syrup, lent authenticity to the chaos. Obviously, the critics were divided on the movie, some praising its inventive spirit, others condemning it as gratuitous splatter lacking moral commentary. But nobody questioned its success in shocking viewers or sparking debate on censorship limits. You might not have liked the movie, but it got your attention. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi was just 20 years old when he filmed the sequence that would come to haunt his career forever. The scene showed Cheryl Williams venturing alone into the Tennessee woods, where demonic trees came alive and brutally violated her in graphic detail with its branches. The camera lingered on every disturbing moment, showing the trees stripping away her clothing and attacking her in ways that left audiences shocked and critics outraged. Raimi later admitted the sequence was unnecessarily gratuitous and a little too brutal, confessing his goal was never to offend people, but simply to entertain, thrill, scare, and make them laugh. In hindsight, he felt he went a little too far, and the world agreed. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Britain's moral crusader Mary Whitehouse seized upon the film, brandishing it as her prime example of cinematic depravity and declaring it the #1 nasty. The British Board of Film Classification initially carved out 49 seconds of footage to grant the film an X certificate, targeting the tree sequence along with other gore-soaked moments like pencil stabbing and dismemberment scenes. But even with these cuts, the film's reputation as an extreme piece of cinema was already cemented. The controversy only worsened when The Evil Dead hit the home video market. A loophole in British law meant videos didn't require classification, allowing uncut versions to circulate freely. This sent moral watchdog groups into a frenzy, and The Evil Dead became the poster child for the video nasty campaign that would forever reshape British censorship. Distributors found themselves dragged into court on obscenity charges an unprecedented 40 times, though only 2 convictions resulted. Finland, Ukraine, Singapore, and other countries banned it outright, citing the extreme violence and the tree sequence specifically. In Britain, video store owners simply pleaded guilty rather than face expensive legal battles defending the film. The panic reached such heights that The Evil Dead was eventually pulled from video stores entirely in 1984 when mandatory video censorship arrived. It wouldn't surface again until 1990, with an additional 66 seconds removed, and the complete uncut version didn't reach British audiences until 2001. But that scene forever proved the most shocking part of the entire movie. Triumph of the Will, 1935. In the early 1930s, Leni Riefenstahl received Adolf Hitler's personal commission to create what would become the most notorious propaganda film in cinema history, Triumph of the Will. This 1935 documentary captured the 1934 Nazi Party Congress in Nuremberg, where over 700,000 Nazi supporters gathered in a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to glorify the regime. Hitler served as the film's unofficial executive producer, his name appearing prominently in the opening titles, establishing an unmistakable connection between the dictator and the finished product. There was no way to avoid the fact that this was a Nazi movie through and through. Riefenstahl deployed 30 cameras and a crew of 150 to document speeches by Nazi leaders including Hitler, Rudolf Hess, and Julius Streicher, interspersing these moments with footage of massed SA and SS troops. The filmmaker pioneered revolutionary techniques including moving cameras, aerial photography, and long focus lenses that created distorted perspectives, all synchronized with Herbert Wendt's sweeping musical score. These innovations earned the film recognition as one of the greatest propaganda works ever created, but also cemented its reputation as a dangerous weapon of ideological manipulation.
Und ich weiß, so wie ihr in stolzer Ergebenheit diesem Deutschland Dienst tut, wird heute Deutschland in stolzer Freude seine Söhne in euch marschieren sehen.
The film's power lay in its ability to present the Nazi movement as Germany's salvation, depicting Hitler's arrival by airplane through clouds as a godlike descent. Frank Capra later drew direct inspiration from Riefenstahl's techniques when creating the Allied response series Why We Fight during World War II. The British, Canadian, and American governments banned the film during wartime, fearing its persuasive power might spark Nazi sympathy. It was such a well-made, artistically pleasing and compelling movie that everyone was terrified about its power. Decades later, YouTube banned the film in 2019 under hate speech policies, declaring it promoted Nazi ideology, which is inherently discriminatory. Modern Germany requires an educational context for any public screenings, acknowledging both the film's historical significance and its continued potential for harm. Riefenstahl spent 50 years defending herself through court cases and memoirs, claiming ignorance of Hitler's vile intentions while admitting her personal attraction to the Nazi leader. That's one hell of an attempted excuse. Natural Born Killers, 1994. When Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers was released in 1994, much of the focus was on the movie's erratic, vibrant style. That punch-drunk aesthetic instantly unsettled censors in Ireland and everywhere who blocked or trimmed the release for fear it glamorized violence. Commentators soon pointed at classrooms where 14-year-old Barry Lukatis walked into a Washington algebra period in 1996 wearing black, quoting the film, and opened fire, later telling police the movie had been his favorite tape. 2 years after the movie's debut, Columbine shooters Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold scrawled NBK across diaries, referred to their plan by that shorthand, and even scheduled the attack for what Harris called the Holy April Morning of NBK, a direct lift from the film's dialogue. A separate incident began on a Mississippi back road in March 1995 when Benjamin Darris shot cotton mill manager William Savage at point-blank range, tucked a bloody souvenir into his pocket, and kept driving with Sarah Edmondson toward Louisiana, where Edmondson crippled convenience store clerk Patsy Byers. The pair had watched Stone's movie repeatedly at an Oklahoma cabin 2 nights earlier. Byers' family sued Stone and Time Warner, with author John Grisham helping to draft the claim, and the case forced courts to weigh whether stylized carnage could be treated like a defective product. Stone argued satire and the First Amendment, while plaintiffs cited the film's pulse-pounding MTV rhythm as incitement. But the situation was even unfolding overseas. French headlines screamed Les Natural Born Killers after Florence Ray and Audrey Maupin led police on a 1994 car chase that ended with 5 bodies. Investigators found movie posters in their flat, though Ray later insisted she had never sat through the whole movie. Another Paris tribunal heard that Véronique Hébert lured a teenage boy to his death in 1996 by staging a scene right out of Stone's film, according to prosecutors, cementing the title as media shorthand for stylish bloodlust. Academics pointed out that criminologists had blamed news coverage for imitators since the Jack the Ripper press frenzy, yet no lab tests could prove a single movie was the motivating factor. Even so, Natural Born Killers kept topping lists of pop culture inspirations for real-world and continues to do so to this day. Level 4. The Birth of a Nation, 1915. D.W. Griffith's 1915 epic, The Birth of a Nation, is America's first blockbuster, running over 3 hours and employing 18,000 people and 3,000 horses. Unfortunately, it's also one of the most racist movies to ever come out of Hollywood. The film portrayed African Americans by casting white actors in blackface, presenting these African American characters as unintelligent and toward white women, while casting the Ku Klux Klan as heroic, honorable protectors of white supremacy.
The film argues that giving black people rights was a terrible, terrible error, and that they did all sorts of horrible things that they didn't actually do, and that the noble Ku Klux Klan was this wonderful savior that saved America.
President Woodrow Wilson attended a special White House screening and reportedly declared it was like writing history with lightning, adding his only regret was that it is all so terribly true. Not America's finest moment.
President Wilson famously said of it, "It's like writing history with lightning." Hell of a pull quote if you want to market your film.
As often happens in the US, the film's impact proved catastrophic for race relations across the country. Harvard research documented that lynchings in counties rose 5-fold in the month after the film arrived, with 606 counties showing the movie between 1915 and 1920. Race riots erupted in Philadelphia and other major cities as white gangs attacked black citizens after viewing the film. In Lafayette, Indiana, a white man killed a black teenager after seeing the movie, though some controversy exists about whether the perpetrator actually viewed the film or just committed the act based on unrelated racism. African American communities organized unprecedented opposition campaigns to the movie, with the NAACP launching what became their most successful early boycott effort, staging mass demonstrations when the film screened in Boston.
A Boston publisher named William Monroe Trotter led the charge, forming some of America's first mass acts of civil disobedience against the film.
The film was banned in 3 states and multiple cities, including Chicago, Denver, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and Minneapolis. But that didn't stop the movie's success. It grossed $60 million by 1917, equivalent to over $1 billion today. An unbelievable success. Merchandisers capitalized by selling Ku Klux hats and kitchen aprons, while theater ushers dressed in white Klan robes for openings. The film directly facilitated the KKK's revival, with the organization using it as a recruiting tool through the 1970s when David Duke employed it to attract new members. Harvard research showed that counties where the movie played continued experiencing higher rates of hate crimes and hate group even a century later. Blood Feast, 1963. Herschel Gordon Lewis knew exactly what he was creating when he filmed Blood Feast in 1963. The director deliberately set out to produce something that had never been seen before on screen. A psychopathic food caterer named Fuad Ramses who butchered women to collect their body parts for ancient Egyptian rituals.
This custom of the blood feast existed for more than 400 years and was finally abolished by Amenhotep II of the 15th dynasty. It is said that even today, there are still followers of this gruesome goddess.
Lewis understood his audience so well that he arranged for sick bags to be distributed at theater screenings, complete with notes warning viewers they may need when you see Blood Feast. Drive-in theaters in Peoria supplied plastic cups as vomit receptacles when the film debuted in July 1963. Either way, the message was clear: you will be nauseous watching this movie.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness some scenes from the next attraction to play this theater. This picture, truly one of the most unusual ever filmed.
That's because the violence was explicit in ways that cinema had never attempted before. Audiences watched Ramses fondle a bloody tongue in extended close-up shots after cutting it from a young woman's mouth. Then it followed it up with dismemberment, brain matter exposure, heart removal, and cooking with human remains in graphic detail. Lewis had spent months in Chicago developing special effects and creating his own formula for stage blood that was described as being bloodier than blood. The carnage was filmed with forensic lighting that allowed viewers to see every detail of the desecrated bodies. His only goal with the movie was to create the most gruesome graphic scenes imaginable.
Well, when we first started shooting with Blood Feast, we needed blood. So we went down to a little cosmetics laboratory and compounded our own stage blood.
But British authorities prosecuted Blood Feast as a video nasty under the Obscene Publications Act. The film received an injunction in Florida that actually helped its notoriety and made it more popular with viewers. Germany declared it guilty of promoting violence and ordered its seizure in 2004, 40 years after its initial release, and all because of one complaint. The film was listed as a video nasty in the UK in 1983, later released with 23 seconds of cuts in 2001, and finally approved uncut in 2005. Critics called it amateurish and vulgar, but its influence on the horror genre proved undeniable. Lewis had successfully created the first splatter film, establishing a subgenre that would face censorship battles for decades. Bad Lieutenant, 1992. Bad Lieutenant opened with a detective plunging spoon first into his own vein to inject a potent mix of his pupils dilated and his face drained of color as he chased the next high. Then it cut to him snorting white powder off a communion photograph. His addictions are on full display, from freebasing crack in dingy hotel rooms to crushing lines on his daughter's prayer card, and audiences recoiled at every second of it. The movie hadn't even started yet.
They came to me as the needy do, and like many of the needy they were rude, like all the needy they took, and like all the needy they needed.
Just when viewers thought they could look away, the narrative dragged them into a grim church basement where two youths forcibly violated a nun. By this point, it should be obvious that the movie exists to shock and not much else, which is why so many people were upset. Religious leaders argued that the movie treated holy imagery like a prop. Christ on the cross was intercut with scenes of binges, communion hosts were ground into lines of and confessional booths were transformed into theaters of voyeurism. It was blasphemous after blasphemous image, each shot designed to cause as much religious offense as possible. Religious leaders felt that this movie had crossed one boundary after another.
You do believe in God, don't you? That Jesus Christ died for your sins?
You stand there and you want me to do everything? Where the are you?
When the Motion Picture Association slapped it with an NC-17 rating, the outcry only grew louder, with some arguing that the film deserved banned status rather than a rating, claiming it was promoting the most extreme examples of degrading content to the point of exploitation.
My work isn't for 5-year-olds, okay? So therefore, for those who see it, no one should be sitting there recutting my movie. If I was the government, if I had a problem with the Bad Lieutenant, then you should just ban the Bad Lieutenant.
Censors in Britain outright refused to grant a video certificate, citing its excessive depictions of illicit substances, sacrilege, and intimate coercion, forcing multiple cuts before any home release could occur. But overall, critics remained divided. Some hailed its unflinching honesty as a twisted form of spiritual parable, while others condemned it as an exercise in shock for shock's sake. By the time it reached art house screens, Bad Lieutenant had become synonymous with scandal and controversy. It's fair to say that it's not a favorite of the ultra-religious. The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, 1989. Peter Greenaway's 1989 masterpiece, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, immediately thrust American censors into an impossible position that would reshape film ratings forever. The Motion Picture Association faced a work so extreme in its depictions of violence and that it defied old traditional categorization. In fact, the film's graphic content pushed boundaries so far that the MPAA refused to grant it an R rating, yet giving it an X rating felt inappropriate for what was clearly an artistic endeavor rather than explicit adult material.
It's called artistry. You know, I'm an artist the way I combine my business and my pleasure. Money's my business, eating's my pleasure.
Miramax found themselves caught between two terrible choices: accept an X rating that would brand the film alongside adult entertainment, or release it unrated and risk theaters refusing to show it. They chose the unrated route, but the controversy had already begun reshaping American cinema. The film's extreme content directly influenced the creation of the NC-17 rating the following year, with Henry and June becoming the first film to receive this new classification that distinguished art from adult entertainment. See, the violence in Greenaway's work went beyond typical cinematic brutality into genuinely disturbing territory. Michael Gambon's character, Albert, subjected his wife to psychological and physical cruelty that inevitably makes you squirm, while the film's cinematic scenes involved force that leaves viewers genuinely shaken and extremely uncomfortable. The isn't gratuitous to the movie's credit. It's clearly serving Greenaway's artistic vision of stripping characters of identity to create universal human subjects.
I'll bloody find him and I'll bloody kill him! And I'll bloody eat him! I'll kill him and I'll eat him!
But whether it is actually art or just shock value depends entirely on your perspective. Legendary critic Roger Ebert questioned whether it was a savage attack on Margaret Thatcher or something else entirely. In fact, the elements worked on multiple levels: literal consumption that paralleled metaphorical consumption in capitalist society. The movie did have something to say about human nature under all of the satire and graphic content.
Well, certainly in terms of this film, it's very, very strong in terms of its violence and the way it gets under your skin. You can't accuse, this film of being ill thought through. Everything has been very well thought out.
British audiences particularly reacted to what they saw as direct criticism of their political system and then leader Margaret Thatcher. However, it was that combination of extreme violence, graphic imagery, and pointed political commentary that created a perfect storm that made the film simultaneously celebrated and reviled. In the Realm of the Senses, 1976.
This movie has had its fair share of controversy, possibly more than its fair share of controversy. Even today, some people debate whether it is art or...
In the Realm of the Senses had shocked viewers from its first frames with an unflinching depiction of raw intimacy between its characters, to the point where the line between performance and reality seemed to vanish entirely. Because there was no line. The director had insisted on filming every embrace and gesture without any simulation, arguing that true expression demanded complete exposure of bodies and emotions. For those who don't know what that means, it means that they didn't fake any of the intimate scenes. Yeah, it was adult content. The movie's narrative, set in pre-war Tokyo, traced an escalating passion that ended in a fatal act, echoing the real-life incident that inspired the story. But let's be real, nobody was really thinking about that. They were too caught up on the whole intimate thing. When authorities in Japan moved to block the film's release, they cited an obscenity statute that forbade any clear presentation of intimate parts, regardless of artistic context. To evade domestic processing laws, the production had sealed its exposed reels in unmarked canisters and shipped them to France for development, ensuring that the full, unaltered footage survived intact and far from Japanese censors' hands. But back in Tokyo, prosecutors charged both the filmmaker and the publisher with violating obscenity regulations, launching a major, shocking trial. In court, the director had stood before judges and declared that nothing that is expressed is obscene. What is obscene is what is hidden. A statement that carried him to eventual acquittal even as the film remained banned in any uncensored form at home. Overseas, movie authorities did everything they could to try and protect the integrity of the movie while protecting the public. Festival organizers in Singapore withdrew the title rather than submit to mandatory edits, and in Britain, classification authorities demanded a delicate reframing of one brief dream sequence under child protection provisions before granting an adult rating. But when the movie premiered at a major European film showcase, it provoked serious protests on the streets. So, is the movie a radical exploration of obsession, or is it a cheap shock tactic for attention? Well, most people can't answer that question because they can't even see it. Locating an uncut edition requires a search through specialist archives or underground screenings. Mainstream platforms still confine it to the strictest adult categories. This may well be the only time you even hear about it. Level 5. Hostel, 2005. Eli Roth's directorial debut, Hostel, is ultra-violent. We all know that. But the backlash it got went far beyond typical horror movie criticism, which is usually just, "this isn't scary" or "this sucks." In fact, the film's relentless focus on prolonged suffering and brutalization created what critic David Edelstein termed violent exploitation cinema, which would come to be shortened into the term
Please stop!
Unlike traditional slasher films where death came quickly, Hostel lingered on human agony for as long as it possibly could, showing victims bound and helpless as wealthy clients paid premium prices to inflict maximum harm on strangers they didn't even know. Slovakia's government officials declared the film damaged their national reputation so severely that they invited Roth on an all-expenses-paid trip to see the real country and see just how wrong he got it. Which, to be fair, sounds like a trap. The country's culture ministry was concerned that American tourism would avoid visiting entirely because of the movie's content. The film depicted Slovakia as crime-riddled and impoverished, filled with broken-down cars and street gangs, painting Eastern Europe as a lawless wasteland where human life held no value, which is not at all what the country is. But was the movie worth the controversy? Read any review of the movie and you'll see they're all divided over whether the graphic violence served any meaningful purpose beyond shock value. However, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter since the movie generated $82 million worldwide on a $5 million budget and ended up birthing a whole franchise, which just caused more controversy. The sequels amplified the graphic content even further, with Hostel Part 2 facing accusations of misogyny for its treatment of female victims. Parliamentary debates in the UK specifically cited the franchise as an example of unacceptable content, with one Conservative MP describing an hour and a half of brutality that somehow received official classification for public release. The films became banned in multiple countries, including Ukraine and Germany, while spawning countless imitators that pushed boundaries even further than Hostel ever did. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS is not the kind of movie you would show your parents. In 1975, the movie saw its title character, a commandant, going about her, business on a fictional Nazi camp. From its opening voiceover of Hitler's rant, viewers watched Ilsa embark on gruesome medical experiments and intimate, lusty encounters that ended in grisly executions. You'll be shocked to know, critics were troubled by its content. Gene Siskel branded it the most degenerate picture I have seen to play downtown, and censors in the UK banned it outright for trivializing real-world atrocities. That's an understatement, really. Scenes of Ilsa testing women's endurance by branding and electrified devices were juxtaposed with her intimate liaisons with male captives, acts that she punished with castration when they failed to satisfy or fulfill her needs. Women were strapped to tables while Ilsa's black widows disrobed and cracked whips in scenes of raw, unflinching cruelty framed as perverse, borderline erotic entertainment. This was Nazi-sploitation at its peak, a genre of propaganda imagery repurposed into an erotica-soaked carnival of cruelty. The film opened with a dedication to historical truth, a lie to justify shock value, but survivors and historians noted that the real Nazi experiments and mass executions were irreplaceably more horrific than any cinematic mockery. It did, however, inspire one hell of a cult following. 3 sequels followed, cementing Ilsa as an icon of female authority, wielding her perversion as a symbol of power. Of course, there is some unethical and moral murkiness given that this movie is literally taking one of the most troubling historical events and turning it into softcore adult entertainment. But to this day, Ilsa's market success in grindhouses and drive-ins turned into an all-time hit in the Nazi-sploitation market. Whether she drew attention to the atrocities is another question, but a lot of young men in the 70s saw her as an extremely attractive figure. I'm not sure what that says about them. Level 6. Caligula, 1979. Caligula first screened in 1979 and became instantly infamous for its unrelenting imagery of classic depravity, combining lavish sets with scenes so explicit that customs in the US seized the reels upon arrival. Producer Bob Guccione, founder of Penthouse magazine, had covertly shot hardcore intimate sequences featuring adult film performers and spliced them into the historical narrative, transforming what Gore Vidal and Tinto Brass intended as a highbrow drama into what many deemed extended adult entertainment with major Hollywood stars. On screen, Caligula's reign unfolded through sequences of orgies and bronze-lit brutality. One moment, bodies writhed in candlelit halls, the next, prisoners were fed to dogs or impaled by swords and spectacles of public torment. Vidal's original script was steeped in political allegory, but all of that vanished under the unapproved additions of unsimulated intimacy and graphic carnage, prompting Vidal to demand removal of his name from the credits. Brass, who had clashed with Guccione over tone, disavowed the final cut entirely and later sued to protect his vision. The talent was also horrified by what had happened. Helen Mirren, cast as Caesonia, had described the project as an irresistible mix of art and genitals, yet she distanced herself from the adult layers Guccione grafted on in post-production. Malcolm McDowell, while defending his performance, called the modern-day inserts an outrageous betrayal that undercut the film's integrity, and he refused any association with that additional content. Peter O'Toole and John Gielgud, both drawn by Vidal's initial script, reportedly regretted involvement once the explicit footage surfaced, retreating from interviews and screenings associated with the unrated editions. Internationally, Caligula became a legal nightmare. In Boston, a judge ruled it not obscene on grounds that its political critique outweighed its more erotic interests, but nearly 11 minutes were excised in the UK, removing scenes of castration and disemboweling before a version slimmed to 133 minutes limped to release. In France, it made TV history in 1985 as the first film to broadcast unsimulated intimacy on public airwaves. Funnily enough, Europe seemed to have no issues with the intimacy, but had major problems with the violence. The US had the exact opposite problem. Despite its withdrawal by many of its own creators, Caligula acquired cult status as a cautionary tale of artistic compromise and the perils of unrestrained shock value. Every scene seemed designed to provoke, and it did that well. As well as other things, I guess. Subconscious Cruelty, 2000. In 2000, Karim Hussein thought he was just returning from a routine business trip when Canadian customs officials spotted the press kit in his luggage. The graphic photos from his film Subconscious Cruelty immediately caught their attention, and things escalated quickly when they discovered he was carrying video copies of the rough cut. What happened next became legendary in underground cinema circles. The customs officials detained Hussein in a jail cell while they watched the entire film. When they emerged, witnesses described them as white as ghosts, and they immediately confiscated all materials, declaring the work too obscene for Canada. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that this was a Canadian film being banned by its own country. So, what exactly was so troubling about the movie? Well, the film itself had already survived a nightmare production spanning from 1994 to 1999. During this period, the original negative disappeared in a financial dispute, forcing Hussein to hand-cut the positive without knowing if he'd ever recover his master copy. He was incredibly protective of his work, but the content that caused such extreme reactions consisted of 4 segments exploring what some called the darkest aspects of humanity. The opening sequence, titled Ovarian Eyeball, featured a woman being dissected with an eyeball extracted from her belly. The second segment, Human Larvae, depicted a brother's obsession with his pregnant sister, culminating in the killing of her newborn during delivery. Rebirth showed naked figures engaging in ritualistic acts involving blood and mud. The final segment mixed religious imagery with extreme violence in ways that were guaranteed to upset Christians everywhere. Theaters that expressed interest in screening the film faced threats from the Ontario Film Review Board, which retained authority to confiscate prints. With limited copies available, distributors couldn't risk losing their materials. The film's reputation spread through festival circuits where viewers reportedly scrambled for the exits during screenings. Japan became the first country to release it on DVD in 2001, as their censorship standards allowed the complete version. But multiple countries banned the work entirely, while others demanded extensive cuts that would have rendered it unrecognizable. Level 7. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976.
In 1981, Trauma picked it up and they turned it into Blood-Sucking Freaks. They changed the title on it, and that's when it gained its notoriety. They put it out in the Grindhouse Cinema, and it got a real name for itself because the stuff in here really is beyond belief.
Who'd have thought the 1976 exploitation film Blood-Sucking Freaks would become a lightning rod for feminist outrage? Literally anybody who saw the movie, probably.
I am Sadhu.
Originally titled The Incredible Show, the film depicted a Grand Guignol theater where audiences unknowingly watched real acts of brutalization and killing disguised as performance art. Director Joel M. Reed created what was nothing more than a catalog of cruelties against women, featuring scenes of thumbscrews crushing skulls, hacksaws severing limbs, and electric shocks applied to female victims. The feminist group Women Against organized protests during the film's theatrical run, recognizing it as something far more sinister than a typical exploitation movie. The organization targeted this movie specifically because it crossed lines that even grindhouse audiences found disturbing. The movie featured women forced to crawl naked across stage, used as human furniture, and subjected to degrading acts that served no narrative purpose beyond pure humiliation. But the film was celebrating this misogynistic violence without any hesitation, not even attempting to use it to make an attempt at social commentary. Unlike other controversial films that at least pretended to explore deeper themes, Blood-Sucking Freaks reveled in its brutality toward female characters. The Motion Picture Association of America refused to rate the film entirely. Even Lloyd Kaufman, the co-founder of the studio, later admitted the film was very misogynistic and stated that today we would not have anything to do with it. But the protests and subsequent cult following created a paradox where the criticism only increased the film's notoriety, ensuring its place as one of the most controversial movies ever made. If you're still in the mood for more film or TV icebergs, why not check out this video on the most disturbing disaster movies?